Hello, and welcome to News 9's Women's Day series. My name is Saurabh Sharma, and I'm joined by the two-time Asia region winner of the Commonwealth Short Story Prize and author of spectacular short story collection, Principles of Prediction, Anushka Jasraj. Welcome, Anushka.
Hi, thanks for that lovely introduction.
Anushka, Principles of Prediction has received some rave reviews. It has been called bizarre often. And to me, it was also a playful connection where the impossible is explored and where concepts like time and space vanish on the palms of your hand, if I may say so. How would you describe your book? What was it like to have decades worth of short stories compiled and assembled into one book?
So it was very satisfying to have all that work collected together and finally, see it as a book and to be able to stop editing each story over and over again, finally, once it's in print. Um, but I have to say that I've probably forgotten some of the stories. They were written so long ago. Um, so yeah, sometimes when I hear the responses to the story, I try to recall whether that's how I also felt about it. Like I don't know if it was ever my intention to be bizarre in any way, or it was very intuitive in terms of the writing process. But I think because the stories were written at such different times in my life, that maybe each one does have a kind of distinct quality, and so taken together they do seem very diverse in terms of their content.
Would you say that your training as a screenwriter and as someone who had also studied gender studies as a discipline also seeped in and reflected the wisdom that you gained over the years in your short stories?
Yeah, definitely. I think because screenwriting is so plot driven and uh, there's almost a formula to it. So I think because I don't intuitively write plot driven stories, so it was always good to kind of have that push to really think about the story and the characters' motivations and the arc of the plot. But overall, I just was drawn more to fiction than to writing for screen because I just loved language and I love thinking about characters and kind of spending time with those things rather than having something very like visual and fast paced, which is maybe what you need more of in screenwriting. And then with gender studies, the influence was less obvious for me in that I was in the master's program in gender studies while writing some of these stories. So it was more like I was just absorbing a lot of things that kind of were metabolized into the stories that I wrote without realizing it, because there's so much information to take in when you're reading feminist theory and like discussing these things, and it's often very difficult to write like a coherent nonfiction argument on such complex topics. So sometimes a story can be an easier space to think through some of those ideas.
That's great. And it's interesting that you said that, you explored this field because, nonfiction would it has to be more disciplined and taught in a way that a fiction can be loose, if I may use that word. But I was thinking to ask you, what do you understand by fiction and reality? Because often reviewers, and I also share the same view, that these narratives are so outlandish that yet they're so real. I mean, I cannot for once dismiss the possibility of anything happening like it happens in the story, your most recent story, which is Luminous. I was bowled over by it. And of course, with my training as an engineer, I could make sense of a few things, and I could sense the rationale behind it, and I could see that this person is not loosely using these scientific words and phrases, not just for the sake of it, for the story. I could see there was a mature narrative there, and also some fantastical stuff. So, Anushka, where do you draw that line? What is fiction on? What is fiction and reality for you?
Um, that's interesting, and I'm so flattered that as an engineer you didn't find it so outlandish. And I mean, I think we've been living through times where we can see that anything is possible. So in fact, that's actually made it more difficult for me to write fiction, because can I really come up with something more fantastical than what's going on in reality? Um, but I think in terms of luminous, I do remember hearing an anecdote about some scientists who were trying to come up with some kind of version of a time capsule and trying to understand what can we have in terms of linguistics or other things that will be understood like centuries from now, because a lot of things might not make sense. So I think for me the fiction comes in because I didn't go and do research around this, like someone just mentioned it and then kind of my imagination took over from there. So I think it's more like some spark or something interesting, where you kind of let your mind run with it wherever you want to go.
It's also interesting because I was reading two poetry collection, again both by Westland. One was by Akhil Katyal, like Blood on a Bitten Tongue, if that's the correct title, and then the other is Run for the Shadows by Sridhala Swami. And both these collection have one particular story where they're talking to a person in the future and asking, I mean, one is saying that you can keep these poems, like Swami, keep these poems as stone with you, and as you take a, I mean, a souvenir or something like that, because that is an alien script now and you may not be able to understand this. And in Katyal's case, it is like, can you go there and check these things if they make sense and if they are there. What is this talking to someone who is not here? Because I found this quality of using the past as a narrative that can be more intriguing and interesting to mine, in your story, which won the first time Commonwealth Short Story Prize, Radio Story. And the second is this Luminous, where I mean, I saw this binary very interesting, that it is almost a historical account and also something that is future telling. Where What lessons do we have for the present in these two, I mean, stretch of times?
Um, wow, the what you described with the Sridhara Swami poem sounds so beautiful. I want to go and read it now, because it also sounds very sad. It's like this sense of disconnection with the very far future where you have no idea what's coming. And I also hadn't thought of the binary where like radio story is historical and luminous is like futuristic. But yeah, now I'm trying to think of what that means, that the oldest story was historical.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, that also struck me, that the oldest one was, I mean, that when the newest one was like trying to think of, I mean, and not to say forward, because I guess your stories move in all directions, radially outwards, radially inwards, everywhere.
um, yeah, I don't know what that is, but I think now generally I do find myself speculating more maybe in fiction. Like radio story was I was just interested in that particular historical narrative already, so I think it just like needed to kind of come out and become a story, and kind of then you are able to move on. So yeah, I'll have to think about this, the past and the future uh, conversations and kind of.
No, but thanks for being honest. And the other thing was, of all these characters. I mean, I for one see that most narratives go so deep into the characters that there has to be certain age. The story should be set in a certain particular time, and they should have this particular gender. and mostly that emphasis is very rigid on gender, that has particular world has to be explored and something. In your stories it is very effortless. I wanted to know what was it your when you were learning, and feminist theories, and of course queer theory must have seeped in, and what was it like for you to actually treat your characters with such maturity, and to actually describe those that queerness queerly. It was not through any gaze. It was described as is. That is why for me in particular it was very effortless. How did you approach writing such characters in your book?
So again, that's so nice to hear. I feel like you just slip a compliment into your questions. So thank you. Um, but yeah, I think partly it was there was a particular book that I read which really influenced my thinking around this, and the I might be misinterpreting the theory. I just kind of make it whatever I understand. Um, but what I got from that book was that when we ask someone to define themselves, like, for someone to say that I'm straight or I'm gay, that's actually like our fear of the lack of boundaries. So for straight people to need to identify someone else as straight or not straight is their own anxiety, that like, how do I make sure that I'm straight? So that way, like, I really if I wrote something where I was like, this character is definitely queer, or not straight, or they are definitely labeled this way, I think that can also become a problem in its own way. um, and like, so it was also interesting, while I was in grad school, there were a lot of conversations around pronouns in the classroom. Like, do you ask all your students to tell you their pronouns? Um, or, what if someone doesn't want to define themselves? And I had a teacher who said, none of us are going to use pronouns. Like, even if you are he or she, we're all going to be they. And that was also very complex, because it's like, what if I really want to be a pronoun? So I didn't have an answer to that, but I felt like in fiction you can leave it open and allow the character to be themselves.
I really why I said that, I appreciate it because it is almost like products. Those characters becomes products for me because every description is there. There's nothing for me to imagine in any story. I mean, any book or which is labeled queer, or for LGBTQI plus people, that this is that particular character and they're doing this. But it's like, you have to find everything for me. I mean, there's nothing in this character arc that I would like to be intrigued by. So that's why I was struck by the stories in this book. Anushka, do you write with an anxiety to be eclectic? I see
Uh,
stories, the way the stories progress. I was wondering whether you take it as a personal challenge that you will write a story that that would make reader struggle, because I think mostly our training, like I've never been trained as a writer, but whatever workshops I have had, they train to you write simply. You want the reader's attention and everything. That's an anxiety that I've seen when I was working with an ad firm. That you that's an anxiety when you want the visitor's attention, not a reader's attention. And but it's mostly it came up in the writing workshop that you write with that you will grab the attention and everything like that. But you almost write with a sense that you want the reader to put down your book. Do you write with an anxiety of being eclectic?
that's interesting. Maybe it's the stories were written, like, very slowly over a long period of time. So maybe what some readers might sense is actually the pace at which I wrote, and that the reading could get influenced by that, in that they are slowed down. But I was also very slow in writing. So maybe what they're sensing is my pace. um, But I think I was lucky that in my workshops, no one was like, I don't get this, or this is weird. That I had peers who definitely just tried to understand what I was doing, and then like meet it on those terms and say, based on what you're trying to do, is it successful or is it not? But yeah, I do wonder about, I mean, there are definitely some people that won't be the right audience for my book. Uh,
How valuable do you find this idea of workshopping your stories? Because mostly writers are hesitant to show out their work, because if an idea's time has already come, and you've written something and somebody else might have published it in your, I mean, God, what value do you place in this system?
so I haven't been in a workshop in so long that I've almost forgotten it. I mean, there are definitely anxieties that come with workshopping, and um, if I think it's more about like if you have people that you trust, then I think it's okay because you're gonna start writing with their views in mind. So just find someone whose opinion you really value. I think that like then it's okay. But it's definitely hit or miss sometimes. If the wrong group of readers can also hinder some of your writing progress, I think.
What excites you about this short story form, when I guess now more than ever the emphasis is on you or somebody would like to say that now that you have produced a short story collection, you will mature as a novel writer. What so yeah, how do you I mean answer this theory, which is, I mean, I think that it has been there for since forever, because almost every time when I read some non-fictional work by a short story writer, they always write this particular thing that people thought that I'll be writing a novel, but I didn't write a novel and all that. So what excites you about this short story form, and how do you see this I mean, I mean, since time immemorial, this debate of short story versus the novel form?
So I do feel like short stories are now kind of my guilty pleasure. But it's funny that you mentioned the thing about people going from short stories to novels, because I think for like many years I have been working on a novel, but it also became like this kind of um machine for producing short stories, where I would think this is a chapter of my novel and then it would turn into a short story. um, but I think it's just exciting to suddenly think of a character or a plot idea that might be kind of outlandish, and you might not be able to spend 200, 300 pages with it. Even a reader might not be able to spend that much time with it. But for 10, 12 pages you can kind of really do anything, so there's so much freedom that way. With the novel, it's like maybe there's also a lot more risk, because um, if your short story fails, that's okay.
It's very interesting, because what you're saying is absolutely right, because many a times a reader would say that those 50 pages were unnecessary for me in this particular novel. That is sometimes indulgence of what Akhil Katyal mentioned in an interview, that his teacher showed him how to distinguish between craft and self-indulgence. So now this makes me ask this next question about craft. How do you craft your sentences? What do you do with your prose? Like, what is your process like? Very cliched question. Yeah.
Oh, no, that's so interesting, because I always uh, feel like I love working on sentences. So my favorite part, or, when I really feel like a story is being worked on, is once I have a draft, and then I just kind of sit with each sentence and kind of figure out like what's working, what's not working, the rhythm of the sentences. So there are a few rules that I've learned, from my teachers, and that still stick with me. Although I'll say that I'm more comfortable breaking those rules now, but they're good to know. And so that would be to try to use a lot of strong verbs to, give a paragraph that kind of flow, and then vary sentence length within a paragraph. Make sure that it's not just one long sentence after another. Somewhere in there, you have to punctuate it with a shorter sentence. And no adverbs. That was kind of drilled into me. No adverbs, no alliteration if you're writing fiction. So those are the rules that I've tried to be okay with breaking more and more. But definitely early on, that stuck with me.
And as you mentioned in an interview that you would take a printout of your draft and delete that file on the system and again retype it, just so that you can pay more attention to the sentences. What makes you do this manual labor?
So this was advice from a screenwriting teacher, but when I'm working on my novel, I haven't, now that it's kind of 40, 50,000 words, I haven't had the courage to delete the file. I actually email it to myself repeatedly so that I don't lose it. But I think maybe for a later draft, I might have to kind of torment myself a little. But it really works because sometimes you look at a sentence on the screen and you're like, I can't change anything about this. But once you actually type it again, I think you see it.
Because I would never want that draft to, disappear and a feather to be placed instead of it, in place of it. we we would rather not meet Prakash in real life, to say so. More and more works by women is be getting published, and so heartening. And to be honest, like I particularly would love to grab a book by an author, because I see mostly those are neglected stories or stories that we haven't paid much attention to, or a different lens. Because I mean, let's face it, men are so boring. So, what excites you about this? I mean, a flood of literature by women, and where do you like, as a reader and a writer, what makes you think? I mean, how do you sense the situation?
Um, yeah, it's been exciting. I hadn't really uh, thought about it consciously. I mean, I've been fortunate to be in spaces where people are just reading more women and, like, more queer writers. And I think for me, though, it's what I seek out is more where the narrative itself is focused more on, uh, non-straight male characters. Because I don't know, I just find that I can no longer sit with those stories. Like if I watch an old Hollywood movie that's focused on the feelings of like a straight man as he goes through his struggles, I can't anymore. Like because I think we were just flooded with so much of that for so long that we just need other stories.
I guess, I mean, it's predictable. That's why I guess, that's why I said, like, maybe boring is too harsh, but that's predictable. There's nothing exciting for a reader to actually, I mean, invest in that particular situation, because I mean, you have to really sit with the book and struggle with the story, because it has to hit you. Then Anushka, what are you working on right now, and who are your favorite writers? Whom do you take inspiration from?
The toughest questions now. So like I mentioned, I have been working on a novel. So now it has kind of got into a stage where I sort of have a full draft, and I'm just rewriting parts of it, actually trying to understand the plot. um, so that's part of what's happening. My favorite authors. God, I feel like it changes, and so I at I'm at that stage where I have to kind of sit and rethink, like, who have I really been reading recently. But Lydia Davis is one person whom I've always loved. And like you mentioned, how do I write my sentences? So sometimes if I'm just stuck on a particular sentence, if I sit and read her work, like something just opens up in my mind. And I think it's because she's a translator, so she's also very attuned to language at a sentence level. So she like has just always had a huge impact on me. And yeah, I also end up reading a lot of just eclectic books, because I'm part of a book club where we just kind of each get to choose a book each month. So uh, I just I've enjoyed that way. You know, you might not like an author, but you get to explore. Um,
Well, thank you so much, Anushka. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you for the thought-provoking questions.